Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stewart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Bankruptcy conversation. And on this segment of the show, I have bankruptcy attorney Anthony Vassallo, principal of the law office of Anthony M. Vassallo, all the way from Brooklyn, New York. Now, Anthony, who is considered to be a leader in the area of bankruptcy, will be talking to you today about the need for full disclosure. Now, I'm sure Anthony's going to expand on that and go into more detail. So if you are one of the many individuals or businesses in financial need within the Brooklyn, New York area, it might be a good idea for you to down tools, log out of Facebook, give Twitter a break for a few minutes, and even switch off Instagram or anything else that you might be doing which may cause a distraction. You might even want to grab a notepad and pen and take some notes as we listen in to what Anthony has to share with us today. So, with that said, let's not keep him waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Yes, welcome. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and the audience.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So, briefly, in your own words then, Anthony, can you describe the kinds of people who you serve and the various types of situations they find themselves in when they come to you for your help?
Sure. My practice focuses primarily on representing individuals who are in financial distress. And the causes of distress, usually from job loss or just a buildup over time of overwhelming debts or the incurrence of unexpected medical expenses. And believe it or not, sometimes that's not only for people, it can also include pets. My typical client, I usually do not catch them at their best because they are, if they're consumers, they may be having marital and family issues, and they are often stressed because of what might have caused their financial issues, and they can be afraid, they can feel defeated, they can be worried. And one of the primary focuses that I have is to essentially just to listen to them and listen to their issues so that we can work out a solution. And believe it or not, I hope to bolster their spirits that that this is something that we can solve together. As a matter of fact, sometimes I find that I'm the only person that they can confide in at a certain point. And it's a similar thing with businesses. A lot of times businesses will come to me and they're having issues with a downturn in their revenues, or if it's like a restaurant or a small business or something, might be having landlord issues, and there could be lawsuits pending. It's the same kind of thing. And we have to do a little housekeeping, so to speak, for individuals and for corporations so that we can move forward and try to, rehabilitate them and get them whatever relief they need in a potential bankruptcy filing.
Okay, so now that we know who we are speaking to today, Anthony, before we go any further, it must be said that anything you share with us today is not legal advice or legal assistance. It's purely for the purpose of sharing information. Now, with that said, I'm sure in all of the years you've been helping your clients out there that you come across many common misconceptions. People come to you, they've done some research online, they've been looking on Google, they've found information, and they believe that to be true. They've listened to friends, colleagues, and people who they've known for a very long time and trust, and they also believe the information they've received to be true. However, you know something completely different. You have to spend time debunking those myths and those misconceptions. So of all of those that you do hear, that you do come across, what's the most common one that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I think that people, when they meet with an attorney, they think that a lot of it is like bringing in credit card statements and saying, okay, here are my debts. How do I eliminate them or get them written off? They don't understand or appreciate, I should say, that the scope and the depth of the disclosure that will be required. Mm. When I do information gathering with clients, we go back pretty far into their past, oftentimes as much as 6 years, so we can discuss the properties they've had, any transfers of property to individuals, foreclosure sales, the ups and downs of their financial situation. And I just try to explain to them that, one of the benefits of bankruptcy is getting protection if you're being sued, or protection from creditors chasing you. And eventually, if it's like a Chapter 7 liquidation, getting a discharge of your debts. But there's a cost for that. And one of them is the burden and obligation of literally putting all your financial details on paper. And that will include, your pay statements, your salary for the past couple of years. Trustees will review your bank statements and activity going back sometimes as often as 2 or 3 years. And there's a lot of paperwork involved. You have to sit down and figure out your income and your expenses and what your budget is. And I think people often come into bankruptcy thinking it's going to be very simple. They don't realize how much work goes into it and how many questions a good attorney will ask. And the questions, quite frankly, sometimes seem intrusive or sometimes seem annoying. But the reason that attorneys ask them is because they're trying to anticipate what might come up in court when you file your papers, and to prepare the client for answering them, and also just to get, the bottom line, honest answers.
Right. So based on what you just shared with us then, Anthony, and obviously keeping your client's confidentiality in mind, please share an example of how you've helped someone who came to you with those misconceptions in mind, and what kind of transformational results you were able to gain for them.
Sure. Actually, I have a couple that come right to mind, because when we have these conversations with clients, sometimes we get a little reluctance from them. They'll say, "Oh, do we have to tell the trustee this stuff?" And 99.99% of the time is yes, we do. One simple example, especially with individuals, there's a lot of cases where individual debtors or prospective debtors will have transferred property to friends or family. They'll all of a sudden gift a car to one of their adult children, so it's no longer considered an asset. You'd be surprised the number of people who do transfers of homes or properties, sometimes vacation properties, because they think, it's no longer mine. So we deal with that, and we try to understand the timing. Real property can be a problem, but things like cars, I've had situations where we are able to explain to the trustee that the consideration was valid, and that it's not an issue. I had a client recently who had gotten a sizable tax refund, and she had taken the money and just sent it to her daughter instead of using it to pay creditors or anyone else. And I told the client, I said, we have, if the trustee asks, or when the trustee asks, we just be upfront with it and explain what you did and why you did it. And sure enough, the trustee asked, and the client wasn't taken by surprise, and she was prepared, and she laid out what she did. The trustee, looked at her and smiled because she empathized with what was going on. And the trustee said, "That's fine. I have no issues about that." Those are the ones that come right to mind.
Okay, thanks for sharing that with us, Anthony. I mean, it's a really good point, and I'm really starting to understand just how important this topic of full disclosure is. So, with your permission, can I just play devil's advocate for a moment?
Sure.
So, I'm a potential client. I come to you for a consultation, and you like you've already said, you want full disclosure. And I'm that kind of guy. I'm say, not everything that I've done in my past is any of your business, right? It's on a need to know basis. So I willingly withhold information and just give you what I think you need for the case. What could be the repercussions of that?
Well, this is, you raise a very good point, because when dealing with bankruptcies, debtors will make mistakes. They'll forget an asset. They'll misstate a bank account or something. Right. And, bankruptcy is very forgiving. Trustees are very forgiving. Mistakes are okay. It's when you get into deceit and evasion, that's not okay. I've found that sometimes clients believe that they can pull a fast one on their own attorney and then, by extension, fool the court. But clients don't appreciate the fact that when they're meeting a trustee, most of these trustees have been trustees for a decade or longer, and they, examine in person hundreds of debtors every year. So they have a big expanse of experience. They know when someone's trying to pull a fast one. They know when someone's trying to be evasive. And they know the questions to ask that sometimes surprise a debtor with the scope of their own investigation. I'll tell you a quick funny story. There was a trustee who was examining, and this was not one of my cases, but I sit in on enough exams, so I understand what's going on, what topics come up. And a debtor was sitting there, was explaining his assets, and the trustee looked up at him and he said, "Do you know how many cars you've had registered in your name over the last 6 years?" And the debtor said, "No, actually I don't." And he said, 47. I checked. Wow. And what it turned out was the guy was a car collector. He would collect cars, refurbish them, and sell them. But it indicated to everyone in the room that the trustee does a lot of work and actually has more information about you than you might know yourself. Right. So that's why I tell people, you have to disclose fully and don't hide anything, because I can filter it and we can determine if there's something bad that might happen or that we can explain certain things. But you don't want to hide things, because I've always said, once you lose the court or the trustee because they think you're lying, everything you say is now suspect.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, Anthony. Now, as a reminder, we're talking bankruptcy today, and the topic for our show is the need for full disclosure. Now, with that in mind, Anthony, and for those individuals or businesses in financial need that are out there right now, they're listening in and they're wanting to know more, what's the most common but unknown pitfall that you'd like to bring to their attention today, regardless of what situation they find themselves in? Actually,
it's a subset of the disclosure things. What people think about the assets they own. They sometimes they think about cars, real property, their bank accounts, and they sometimes forget that they have intangible assets such as an interest in a business, whether it's incorporated, even something like having an eBay store or some other online presence, or that they're part of a family business or even have an LLC. And this adds something else that comes up in a pitfall is a lot of times debtors underestimate the value of their assets, whether it's the home, an interest in their business, even cars. And these are the kinds of assets that a trustee can actually, we're talking a Chapter 7 liquidation type, we can put his or her hands around to take possession of and try to sell, so that there might be a distribution to creditors. And another thing, the pitfall that people have is that they sometimes forget or don't realize that interest in lawsuits, especially personal injury lawsuits, are also assets and need to be disclosed. There are cases by the dozen out there where debtors inadvertently or purposely forgot to list those lawsuits. They end up not being a plaintiff anymore. They lose their right to recover anything under those lawsuits, and the bankruptcy estate takes it. can be a very harsh remedy by not thinking through these things. And that's where an attorney can be helpful, but a debtor has to ask questions as well.
Right. So on the topic of attorneys, if there is somebody out there who is looking to, take on the services of a bankruptcy attorney, what are one or two questions that they should ask that professional to help them determine whether to move forward or not?
Well, the primary question that they should ask is, what options are there? What kind of bankruptcy? Well, two options. One, do you think a bankruptcy is appropriate? Because sometimes people are in such dire situations that bankruptcy can't help them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're in such a good situation that you don't want them to file for bankruptcy because it could just wreak some havoc. So that's the first, during the consultation, you want to lay out what the situation is, the good and the bad. And it's a valid question saying, do you think a bankruptcy is appropriate? I've told clients sometimes both things. I've told them, no, bankruptcy won't help you. And sometimes I said, we need to buy as much time as possible because you're not going to get what you want. You're not going to keep your home if we file for bankruptcy or whatever. And that's the first one. And then the second one is to, ask what the options are, what seems to be the best one, and make sure the attorney explains the pros and cons, and that if you have any questions, you should never hesitate to ask. Don't ever feel like just because an attorney says it, you're supposed to immediately understand it. I don't mind being peppered with questions. As a matter of fact, I appreciate it because I want the client to be engaged and get educated about the process. I want to demystify some of this stuff. I don't want anyone to say to me, just do it. Right.
I mean, that's some great tips there, and especially that second one. I know from my own perspective, when I need something explained to me, it has to be explained in a certain way that I can process that information.
Exactly.
And quite often when I go to a professional, the way how they explain things, it doesn't align with the way how I learn, the way how I process information. And I really just have to have the courage to say, look, I don't understand. Can you explain it this way for me? Can you, explain that in a different way? So that's a really valid point, what you bring up there. So, thanks for sharing that with us, Anthony.
No, my pleasure.
All right. So very briefly then, Anthony, how many years have you been a bankruptcy attorney?
I've been in active practice for a bit more than 20 years. And I came to bankruptcy practice in a somewhat, I guess, in a straight line in some ways, but an interesting path nonetheless. Because when I graduated from college, I was actually a paralegal or a legal assistant at 2 or 3 bankruptcy firms for about 9 years. I wasn't really interested in going to law school. And then at a certain point, I was encouraged by some people I was working with to do so. So I actually went into law school. It was 9 years after graduating from college. Went to law school at night, continued my full-time legal assistant job so I could pay my way through. And after that, thanks to some encouragement by some other colleagues, my first job out of law school was being a law clerk for the chief judge of the bankruptcy court for the Southern District of New York in Manhattan, where I was for 2 years. And then after that, I practiced at a couple prominent bankruptcy law firms for more than 10 years. And then I moved to a bank where I was in-house counsel, where I learned the pitfalls and problems that banks have dealing with bankruptcy cases. So, overall, I had the paralegal training, I had the law clerk exposure, and then worked in a couple big firms and small firms, and then in a financial institution. So I got to see different ways that bankruptcy practice is handled, from the nuts and bolts to being in court a lot, to researching and understanding how judges think and draft opinions, and then being in practice on my own. And about 3 years or so ago, I opened up my own private practice. So I'd like to say I have a very well-rounded experience, and I can bring a lot. I personally feel I bring a lot to discussions with clients and other parties.
Well, I'm sure after 20 years, you must have helped hundreds, if possibly not thousands of people, right?
Yes, I'll stick with the hundreds.
The hundreds. Okay, so with that said then, Anthony, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning and you've got a full day ahead of helping those people who find themselves in financial need, whether they're individuals or businesses? How does the day feel like that for Anthony Vassallo?
Sometimes it can be overwhelming because I admit sometimes I've told friends that if I don't feel some nerves or, in the pit of my stomach, like before I have to go argue a case, then even if I'm 100% sure I'm right, I said, then there's something wrong because, we're dealing with human beings and you're trying to protect them and you never want to take anything for granted. And there are a lot of times when at the end of the day, I feel very gratified that everything works out. And a lot of this is problem solving and a lot of this is about human relations. And, sometimes we don't get the result that we want. And it bothers me for a while. And I always think, what could we have done better? And sometimes there's nothing, but still, this is the kind of business that I guess if you want to be detached, you can, but I've always found that, I'm still enthusiastic about what bankruptcy law can do for people, and I'm enthusiastic about helping the clients.
Fantastic. So I'd like you just for a moment then, Anthony, just to picture the kinds of individuals and businesses that you help. Those that are in financial need, they come to you for your guidance and they're wanting to know more about the need for full disclosure, which is our topic for the show today. Now, with that picture in mind, Anthony, what final thoughts would you like to share with them before we move on to our last question for today?
I think two thoughts that come to mind.
Okay.
One is, for anyone listening, if you have even an inkling of financial difficulty or distress, don't delay in contacting a bankruptcy attorney. 99% of us give, a free consultation. We're always happy to speak to people. It's one way we learn as to what people are struggling with. And also, many of us actually believe in putting a good face on lawyers and how law is done. I tell people that I sometimes wish a prospective client would have come to me 3 or 6 months earlier than they do, just so we could have done some planning, perhaps avoid a bankruptcy or at least minimize the unfortunate consequences that will come from a filing. And the other thing that comes to mind is, treat your bankruptcy attorney with respect. I mean, sometimes I see myself almost like a confessor, like a priest or a therapist, where the client actually feels like they can share everything. They don't have to deal with family. They don't have to deal with friends. And what I tell my clients is, whatever you tell me, I'm not here to judge you. I'm just here to help you. And that I've realized that sometimes my advice might be the first straightforward conversation they've had about their finances or with their life situation that they've been able to have. And, and sometimes I have to give them harsh medicine, but you know what? I'm just going to be honest with them.
It's really important work what you're doing out there, Anthony. I mean, people are coming to you at a very vulnerable time of their lives and having to just really open up, possibly, as you've alluded to, like they've never opened up to anybody before. So it's, the more as I listen to you, the more clear it's becoming just how important this kind of work is that you're doing out there. So I really thank you for what you do and having an impact on people's lives. Yeah, you're so welcome. And this is why we have the show, is to give people like yourself a voice You're out there having a positive impact on people's life, hence the name of the show, Impact Makers Radio. So it's great that you've come on to here and shared some of these insights, which I'm sure are only just scratching the surface of how you could help people after 20 years in the industry. But if there is somebody out there then who's listening in right now, Anthony, and they want to know more, they need help, they need more assistance, and especially if they need more help in terms of full disclosure, they want to know more about that. If that's the case, then how would they be able to find you? How would they be able to get in touch with you?
Well, there are two primary ways. I do have a website. I'll spell it out because it's www.am, V as in Victor, ASS as in Sam, law.com. People can always call me at 347-464-8277. It's a New York number. And if they want, they can go to my website and send me an email, or they can email me directly, which would be tony@amvasslaw.com. And just to clarify things, I am located in Brooklyn, but I actually represent clients in all 5 boroughs and even Long Island and some counties in upstate New York. I'm very happy to travel to represent clients.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us, Anthony. Okay, so that's it for today's show, ladies and gentlemen. As a reminder, that was Anthony Vassallo, bankruptcy attorney. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing so generously with us today. You certainly have demonstrated that you are a true educator, advocate, and trustworthy advisor for your client success. So thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much.
You are so welcome. And we can't leave without saying a big thank you to you, our listener. Where would we be without you? We wouldn't have a show. We wouldn't have anybody to speak to. So thank you for joining us on this very insightful and informative discussion with one of the top bankruptcy attorneys in the Brooklyn, New York, and all the other areas he mentioned that I can't remember because I'm from England and I can't remember all of those names. But anyway, contact him. Remember, his name was Anthony Vassallo. Make sure you do check him out. Give him a call. Visit his website. After today's show, I'm 100% sure that you're going to be in good hands. So that's it, folks. Again, my name is Stewart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading bankruptcy professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Bankruptcy Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present, and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.